No, aquí.
Bien, vamos a continuar con nuestro programa. Es para mí un honor presentar a nuestro siguiente ponente, que de hecho lo tuvimos ayer, y bueno, hablamos de su currículum, del doctor George Stergiou, y él es de Grecia, él es presidente de la Sociedad Internacional de Hipertensión, evidentemente es jefe de un departamento de hipertensión allá en Grecia, pero además es líder en varios programas de cobertura muy importantes en el mundo. Es jefe del STRIDE BP International Organization and Blood Pressure Measurement Methodology and Technology. Es un honor para nosotros tenerlo aquí. Y él nos va a hablar sobre, si ya escuchamos al doctor Rhodes sobre las guías europeas, y ahora le cuestionamos a él qué retos hay, qué nuevos retos, o cuál es the new challenge for the hypertension treatment or the situation. Y vamos a escucharlo con atención, por favor, doctor Stergiou.
So thank you for this invitation to talk about, can I have my slides? Yes. So I'll talk about artificial intelligence, but also how it can help for adherence. So my talk is not in general about technology, but in its relationship with treatment adherence. These are my declarations for this talk. So I'll start where Professor Koist ended. The WHO made a report in 2025 and said that we have a major problem, 30%. The population, the number of hypertensives is growing, and they made the point that hypertension is the strongest risk factor, not cardiovascular risk factor, among any risk factors for global health. So why should WHO publish a report in 2025, whereas nothing has changed from 2023? We still are not doing a good job. And the answer is that 4 countries, within a short time, a few years, managed to change the epidemiology. So this is why this report was published, to show that you can't change hypertension awareness, treatment, control within a few years with a strict plan. And Professor Crowe discussed about guidelines. He focused on recent guidelines. And we have this intellectual exercise to compare guidelines. But in general, there is a lot of agreement in the main elements of management among guidelines. And so it's not a problem that we don't know what to do with this disease. The problem is we don't know how to implement what we should be doing with this disease. And yesterday we spent quite a lot of time to present a tool, a practical tool on how to improve diagnosis and control of hypertension. I'd like to show you that it is possible to control the most of our patients. This is an insurance company in the United States, Kaiser Permanente. So you can see across the years the prevalence of hypertension control in the United States. And you can see here what they did within the context of this insurance company. They were able to reach, with the drugs we have now, 90% of hypertension control. So you can reach 90% of hypertension control in this country. It's feasible. But we don't make it. So why do our patients remain uncontrolled? Across the world, 1 out of 2, at least 1 out of 2 treated hypertensives are not controlled. These are data from your neighbor country, United States. And in the United States, almost 1/3, 1 out of 3 treated hypertensives are not taking their pills properly, which means they are not well controlled. And the WHO has identified the reasons related to the patient, the disease, the drugs, and the healthcare system. There are different sources of not taking your pills properly. Does it matter which drugs you give? These are different drugs. You can see after 6 months, all the drugs went down, all patients with any of the drugs, many of them stopped them, and this became stable. So you have problem with all the drugs. It happens irrespective of the drugs, but of course you can see the renin-angiotensin system blockers have an advantage. But it's not only the drugs. Another factor is the age. The young people are the worst. The older people have better adherence. So the drug class matters, the age matters, the sex matters. Women always do better, not only hypertension, but in all diseases. They have higher levels of diagnosis and better levels of control. So if you have a young man, very difficult patient, I'm afraid, to adhere with treatment. Where you live, urban versus rural. The urban does worse. So it's the drug class, it is the age, it is the sex, it is the region where you live. And you can see the differences here. So there's several factors and which affect also the blood pressure control. And you can see here the number of drugs. Women always do better, but the more drugs they get, the less the adherence with treatment. So the number of the pills is also important in both men and women, and again, women do better. The complexity of the treatment. Sometimes treatment has to be complex, but many times treatment can be very simplified to be practical for the patient. You can see here, for each additional dose per day, you reduce the adherence by 10%. And you can see the adherence with single, double, and triple pill combinations from 55 to 40 to 33. So the number of the drugs and the number of the pills also have impact on adherence. And this is a meta-analysis by Professor Parati from Milan, which showed the impact of simplifying therapy, putting more drugs in one pill, 2 drugs, 3 drugs, single pill combination. And stick to the first one, 78% improvement in medication adherence and in medication persistence. So it's important to use few pills, single pills, simple therapy. And this is analysis by Professor Tsoufis, who is also from Athens in Greece, and Professor Kreutz. And they looked at the evidence we have from studies that had fixed dose combinations. You can see here the number of studies. You can see impact in randomized control trials. Always, if you have the same pills in fixed dose combination, the adherence is better, and also from observational studies. This is why all the guidelines, and I'm showing you the societies which represent, the ESH and the ISH, all of them recommend at the initial step combination and single pill fixed dose combination. It is important to understand the impact of adherence. These are data from the Korean registry, includes almost 1 million people, and you can see the worse the adherence, the higher the risk of cardiovascular events. So The patient we saw yesterday with low adherence, she has another cardiovascular risk factor. Because if you don't treat a risk factor, then not taking your pills is a risk factor by itself. So poor adherence should be considered as an additional treatable cardiovascular risk factor. We certainly need help. Technology promises to help us, and it's here, it's happening, and it will change what we do in clinical practice. This is an analysis which says that AI can really make a difference in the management of hypertension. It can help in measuring blood pressure. It can predict hypertension with quite high accuracy, close to a casual office blood pressure measurement. It can give you more accurate diagnosis. It can predict the impact and the effect of antihypertensive drug therapy. It can predict the prognosis. And this is a statement by the NIHs, and this is important because the Americans here included not only doctors, but also statisticians, and also those people who work on machine learning and artificial intelligence. And the idea is, what is the potential of this technology in hypertension? And what are the problems and the questions we have in using them and taking the advantage that they can offer? They clearly identified that we have privacy and security principles when using these technologies. We have several research questions which need to be addressed before using them. There are barriers in their use in clinical practice, and there are opportunities which have high priority and should be investigated. This is an interesting study which shows that these technologies are not for the high-income countries. These are telehealth, digital health innovations for rural primary healthcare settings, not for rich countries, but for low-income settings. And you can see they looked at telemedicine and telehealth interventions, the cost, the time effectiveness, the quality of healthcare provided, how patients and how doctors see them, how healthcare providers can deal with them, and what are the barriers. The conclusion was that there is considerable potential of these technologies for rural areas who have difficult access to healthcare settings. It can improve healthcare delivery, reduce the cost, and enhance patient and healthcare professional outcomes. So I'll show you another study, which is again recent. This is based on an analysis of 13 studies, and they looked at smartphone applications, which are quite popular, SMS messaging, and remote monitoring. And the conclusion was again that there are significant reductions if you apply any of them. The control of blood pressure is improved. The adherence with treatment is improved. And there are also benefits in improving lifestyle. So the conclusion was that digital health and telemedicine interventions can be effective and can improve the management of hypertension. And I think this is the most interesting study because it's a big one. It's based on almost 100,000 people, 74 studies, and they looked at two things. One is the mobile health, the smartphone, telehealth applications, and the combination of the two. And you can see here the results. Mobile health was useful in anything: decreased blood pressure, medication adherence, blood pressure control, and weight control. Telehealth was not very useful by itself alone. The combination was also helpful, which means that we have a tool in our pocket. Our patients have a tool in our pocket. They may not have a blood pressure monitor, but they have a smartphone. So we can enter hypertension management in the pocket of our patients. So we already entered the era of wearables. In 2023, more than 50% of the Americans were wearing something which measure more things than one might think. And everything is going to change. There is no area in medicine which will not be influenced by wearables. Not only cardiovascular, but also respiratory, neurological, gynecological, everything will change with wearables. The promise is that these devices, instead of collecting snapshot information, one measurement today, one blood test today, one evaluation today, and one after a few months, they take continuous, very rich data, and they can identify diseases and problems very early, because they provide all the information, not pieces of the information which we now use in medicine. The problem is, and you have to remember that, more data does not mean more information, because some devices say, look at how many numbers. Well, are they useful? They have to show that they can change the outcome. So earlier detection does not necessarily justify early intervention. So we have to show that the risks and benefits of early intervention are proven. We need randomized controlled trials for that, and this is going to be expensive because these are low-risk patients with earlier diagnosis. So many people say that the future of blood pressure measurement is cuffless, and maybe it's right. Of course, you have in mind something like that. Or maybe a ring has advantages because the digital arteries are better in giving a signal rather than the radial artery. And Microsoft also has this kind of wearable blood pressure monitor. But the WHO is interested on this device because you have it already. And this is even better, remote monitoring. You open your smartphone in the morning and it says, good morning, George. I think your blood pressure today is not that good. These technologies can change everything. They can improve screening. Think if everybody of you could have an accurate device now in your pocket, your smartphone. They can give us much more accurate diagnosis because we don't have office, home, ambulatory, you have everything. All the information, not pieces of the information. It can improve monitoring because the blood pressure monitor is on the patient. So think about that. Office, home, ambulatory are gone. Why it's called must? It doesn't exist. You have all the blood pressure information. We have complete information of the blood pressure profile and behavior rather than pieces of this information. And we'll have also information variability, which is also important. So this is a tricky slide to understand what all these technologies are about. So you have a sensor looking at the pulse wave, your WAF, a waveform measurement. And then you also have, in most cases, coupled with ECG. And then you do a calibration, which means that these devices know something about the individual. It could be a cuff blood pressure measurement or demographic information, your age, your sex, your body size. So they know something about the user, and they come individual user devices. You can't measure this one and the other one. It's your device only. And then they calculate the changes of blood pressure in comparison to the calibration. They don't measure blood pressure, they measure blood pressure changes. The other problem is that there are many different technologies. There are differences in terms of the blood pressure output frequency. It could be continuous or intermittent. There are automated devices or manual devices. There are some of them need a cuff blood pressure measurement, others need demographic information, and the sensor could be a heart level or at your wrist, which makes a difference. So it's quite tricky and the design of these devices. And the classic protocol we use for testing all the cuff devices is entirely useless for these devices. So the European Society of Hypertension has developed a protocol for cuffless devices, only for cuffless devices. There are 6 tests. I'm not going to go into detail. According to the device types, and there are at least 9 different types, you need a different set of tests to verify their accuracy. There are some of them on the market, and you shouldn't be confused. Some of them are FDA cleared. Is it enough? Some have European CE mark, and some are approved by STRIDE BP. So what is FDA clear? Basic level of scrutiny and can be put on the market. Is that enough? It's not enough. CE mark, assessment to meet high safety, health, and environmental protection requirements. It's not going to kill you. Is it accurate? This is how the CE mark and FDA works. But STRIDE BP means it is clinically useful. You can use it for decision making. That's why STRIDE BP is endorsed by the ISAs, the ESAs, the World Hypertension League. It is for us, for clinical use. And it's clear, all the guidelines, ESAs, ESC, American Heart, you're glad to see, they fully agree, don't use them at the present time. I'll close with Apple. The Apple is a very smart company. They invent things which we don't know, and they explain to us that we need them. So they found a really innovative way to make this technology useful at the present time. So your watch may have hypertension notification feature. This is only for untreated people, those people who just wear iWatch. They use the American definition, 130/80. They use a machine learning algorithm and they analyze signals for 30 days. So the device is watching at you for 30 days. And then it has sensitivity 40%. You might say, that's not good, but wait. Specificity 92%. If the device tells you that something is wrong, 92% it's wrong. It's not a blood pressure monitor. It doesn't compete with these devices. Apple says that they will find 1 million untreated people in 1 year. We cannot do that. These are people who will never reach the healthcare. Even if they miss 40%, those which are identified, it's important to know. So the last comment is that we should be careful with all these technologies. Software is a medical device. Why? Because it can harm. And for any of these tools, we also need class of treatment effect, as much as we do with the drugs. We need level of evidence for the information, and we need to make sure how to use them in clinical practice. Otherwise, we will not be able to make them helpful for patient care. The FDA is going to watch, and it's important to treat these devices and these apps as in the same rigorous process as the drugs. You see the rise in these technologies in medicine, and the FDA is going to play a central role and oversee all these technologies. So, artificial intelligence is here. It's changing medicine. It will improve medicine. It's going to help us. And be prepared to use them effectively. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias, doctor Sergius. Pues como ven, estos nuevos retos no tienen nada de nuevos. En realidad, como él dice, el futuro ya es hoy. Y tenemos que estar preparados para saber utilizar todas estas herramientas que puedan beneficiar a nuestros pacientes. Tenemos un par de minutos si alguien quiere un comentario, una pregunta para el doctor Sergius. I would like to ask you, Doctor. Many of us are preoccupied by the cost because we believe that maybe the new technology is very high, the cost, or is difficult to take. What do you think about it? This is only an illusion, or is real that the expensive in this kind of devices?
The cost is essential. Even in our household, we have to think about the cost. But it's not the cost, it's the cost of the effectiveness.
Okay.
And because hypertension is a long-term disease, for example, if you buy a home blood pressure monitor today, you have to, the cost benefit will be seen for 5 years, 10 years. So these technologies seem to be cost effective even in low resource settings. But as you said, these have to be proved. You have to show measurable cost-benefit ratio. But it seems that even with low resource settings, particularly in them, you pay for the design to develop it, but because you're using that for quite a long time, it seems to be cost-effective even for low resource settings.
And the time to prove that these devices are very useful, I mean, the rings or whatever device in the future, I think we need time to prove that are effective. So the time is maybe, I don't know if it's a problem. I know that it will be disponible for us very soon, but the time to prove that these devices are correct to use, what do you think about?
This is the most crucial question. These technologies bring complexity to our work. So we are prepared to take it. But before the cost effectiveness, the first question is, using this technology, taking over these additional tools, is it going to change the outcome of the patients?
Exactly.
Unless this is proved, there's no point to use any of them. We are prepared to bring more tools, but as much as we do with the drugs, first we have to prove that the patient's outcome will improve because we implemented these technologies.
Thank you very much. Y si no hay otra pregunta, bueno, muchas gracias, thank you very much. Y vamos a continuar con nuestro programa.